Good morning. This is Meg Riley here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcoming you to another hour of conversation and lively discussion on the VUU. Let's start with having our regular folks introduce themselves, and then we will move on and introduce special guests today.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford. I am here in hot and weird Austin, Texas.
Hi, I'm Tom Shade, and I'm calling in from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where it's hot, and I suppose it's a little weird here, but in a nice, conventional Midwestern kind of way. So kind of weird and not weird at the same time. But it's hot.
I'm Aisha Hauser. I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm at Bellevue, Washington, Greater Seattle area, and it's warmer than we're used to here, so we can't wait for the rains to come back.
Hi, everybody. It's Patrice Curtis. I am calling from Washington, D.C., where it is hot and finally muggy. The weather's been pretty nice for the last week, but it's back.
Behind the chalice, we have Shauna Foster, who is doing our tech. Shauna would want me to say that you can Twitter at #TheVUU, TheVUU, and you can also use the question and answer function to ask your questions. Today, partly because tomorrow will be the 9th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina and the federal flood of 2005, we are delighted to welcome guests from New Orleans, one of whom just disappeared, but, oh, there he is, he's back. So we are excited that we'll be talking today to Reverend Jim Vanderweel, the Minister of Community Church, UU in New Orleans, Deanna Van Diver, the Executive Director of the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal, and a community minister serving the Greater New Orleans UU cluster, and Paul Beadle, the minister at First Unitarian Universalist Church of New Orleans. Welcome, guests. We're so glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So before we talk about things past and present in New Orleans, let's just do a little catch-up of what's going on today. Oh, I see we're joined by one more of our regulars. Hank, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Sorry I was late. This computer of mine, I didn't wind it up enough, so. But I'm here now.
You're going to ride a bicycle while you talk just to keep the charge up?
Yes.
I already am.
There you go. Okay. So what's on everybody's mind, VUU folks? What are you thinking about today?
Well, mine's a little thing, but so I'm in Austin now, and Austin has this slogan, "Keep Austin Weird," which I put yesterday on Facebook. I really kind of find redundant. It's kind of like it can't be anything else. And our example this week of that is there was a story in the news. Police officers are trying to find someone who made a donation at one of the Goodwills here. They donated a human skull. And the police are kind of, wanting to ask you questions about that. So, I only in Austin, you're decluttering and you have this human skull, and, well, surely someone will want it. So there you go.
Well, I'm looking at Aisha, the religious educator, going, I could use that.
It was probably one of those homeschooling moms. You know how they are.
Oh, Lord. Well, some of us did the ice bucket challenge since last week. Shauna started it here. Hank did it, tagged me, which really made me grumpy because I kind of had just been wanting to take a complete pass on the whole thing. And may I just say I fully intended to ignore your tag, but then it was really humid here. It was like 105 humidity. I was over at the Eller Isaac's house. They had a lot of ice on hand, and I said, oh, Hank tagged me. And their daughter, Hannah, said, I've been dying to do the ice bucket challenge. So we all did it. Shauna made a little video with her and Hank and me and Jan Eller Isaacs and Hannah Eller Isaacs, which is just particularly silly. But I wanted to be clear because there's been a little bit of conversation in collegial chats about people feeling tagged and should they be obligated, that I felt no obligation to do that, absolutely none. But it did feel actually pretty good on a hot day. And now I see that the UU Church of Atlanta has seized on that as a fundraising opportunity for the church. I mean, they're pointing people to the traditional give your money to ALS, but then they're saying they hope it fosters generosity to the church as well. So I thought, well, that was using it. That was using that.
Dunk tanks in the pulpit. Dunk tank in the pulpit.
Some of the New England pulpits could do it. Oh, Lord.
That's a high fall, you know.
It's true. Right.
Much higher fall than out west. Right?
It'd be like the Milwaukee Brewers, you know, when somebody hits a home run, you come down a slide, and into the big, like that. It could be like that, you know.
I decided I could just give money.
Hey, can we talk for a moment about the financial cuts at the UUA?
Yeah, sure.
You know,
Talk on, Hank.
Well, it was.
Sounds like you have something to say.
Well, it was, the thing that I think most people.
Hank, I'm hearing you twice.
And I don't know why.
I don't know why you swallowed the.
Buttons are being pushed. I don't know. Maybe better if I take it out. I don't think so.
I tell you what, let's get Dave about the cuts, because I know that's on her mind too.
Delay.
Sorry, Hank. I don't listen to you right now. I apologize, but that's. Wait a second, Shawnee, trying to say something to us. This is live TV, everyone.
Even if it's not TV. I think
that's better. That's better. Okay, everybody else will mute. Everybody but Hank. Okay, we'll listen to you.
There we go. It wasn't me. Okay. But you know oh my gosh, I can't think of the name. That our good friend Mr. Skinner ran for years out of the UUA, out of that
Interconnections, I believe.
Interconnections. Thank you. Yes, Interconnections. Thank you. Which was really a great sort of hands-on, like, here's things that other churches are doing. You should try it out too. Here are ways to do it. And it was, and that was one of the things that got cut. And a lot of other things got cut as well. And I know we want to have try to have a balanced budget, even though we had this $400,000 loan from the board. But it was one of the things that I felt really was reaching out to member congregations, as great support from member congregations. And it's gone. So I'm missing that, and I don't think we should just overlook these cuts that have gone on.
And also, am I on now? Also, the Reverend Dr. Monica Cummings, the Minister to Youth and Young Adults of Color, was cut in half, and the only credentialing person for both the musicians and religious educators was also cut in half. So I'm also, along with the cut of Don Skinner, I'm deeply disappointed. And it seems sadly short-sighted, frankly, to cut those two positions especially in half. Seems very disappointing to me.
Yeah, it's always sad. I've been in that room when you have to make those cuts, and there aren't any happy ones. I know that. Yikes. Is it me? Everybody mute if you're not me, okay? Oh, there we go. Sure. I know that it's especially upsetting. The position, Dr. Monica Cummings' position, was cut in half, and that won't work for her, so she is leaving. And that is, I think, for many of us a particular loss, because she has done such very fine work with youth and young adults of color, and also with military ministries. And she worked with CLF our first year of worship. She stepped up to do some alternative kinds of worship to reach out to youth and young adults of color. And she's just, I think it's personal for a lot of us. These cuts are people that we know and care about, and the functions affect people that we know and care about. So I know I've been seeing on various lists that people are upset about different ones of the cuts. I know that the ministers' chat group has been really talking especially about Monica Cummings' position. And I will say, having had to do those cuts, that it's really crappy to be in that room. And yeah, so it's a sad thing. Anna, did you want to say something? Okay.
I'll say something, as usual. Right? The thing that's like particularly remarkable about that cutting the position of the ministers for youth of color is that right now you're seeing across the country the emergence of a powerful movement among youth of color. That's a national movement, and that's where we should be. We should be increasing our investment into people who can be working with UUs in that youth movement and within that youth movement. That's crazy. This is like turning away from the action, and that is just bad strategy. It's bad strategy. Whatever it means financially, it's bad strategy. We should be doubling our number of people who are trying to build relationships with youth of color through our own youth and with other youth to be part of that movement, because that's going to dominate. I think that's going to be a really big thing for the next, for years to come. I mean, I don't think police shootings are going to go away anytime soon, and I don't think that people are going to accept it anymore.
And for those of us who are parents of teenagers of color, am I the one? Is it? Everyone's muted but me, and it sounds bad. Uh-oh. Tom, you're not muted. Okay. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I think what it is that we have more people than usual on the VUU today. And I think Google on the Air doesn't quite know what to do with all of us, even though technically they can handle this many people. This is a free platform we're using. So there you have it. You got what you pay for. Anyway, what I was going to say is, as the parent of a teenager of color, programs like the ones that Monica's been running are what make the difference between kids staying and going. And so I certainly hope that this is a temporary cut and that it will build back up, both for reasons of reaching outside the denomination and for reaching inside the denomination. So
I remember being really surprised when there was an article posted on Facebook where they talked about young adults leaving the church, except for young adults of color, and apparently not leaving the church. I thought that was really fascinating. The other interesting thing that just came to my attention a couple days ago is that when we ask the demographics of our church, we will have a lot of parents who will identify themselves as, let's say, one ethnicity or one race. And then when they identify their kids are identified as multicultural. And so even within our own movement, we're growing this, fabulous, diverse, new generation. So it's really really disappointing, and taking us away from what we say we want to do, which is to be meeting right into the 21st century.
Well, I think the statistics about youth of color not leaving the church are about not leaving churches, like African American youth are staying in African American churches. I think it's a demographic about youth leaving churches which are really grounded in serving particular communities of color. At least that's how I read those. And it said to me kind of what Tom's saying.
It could be us.
It could be us, but it's, yeah, exactly. It could be us. It won't be us unless we step up a little bit. So let us talk to our visitors today. 9 years since, boy, a day that many of us will never forget, Hurricane Katrina. And then I wondered, Dee, you used a phrase I actually had never heard before. I certainly heard everybody in New Orleans talking about the flood versus the hurricane, but I never had heard the phrase the federal flood of 2005. Can you explain why that is the phrase that you use?
Sure, that's the phrase that has grown up here as we became really aware that it wasn't the hurricane itself that left such devastation. It was the federal levees breaking and the federal investment in those levees. So that if it had just been the storm and the levees had held, it would have just been another hurricane. the levees breaking flooded the city. The city's sitting in for 3 weeks in submerged. That's what brought such a sense of devastation. And so we're pretty clear that the hurricane was the leading force, but it's the divestment from the federal government and the levee system over the years that caused the flood, that brought the disaster.
So hence the federal flood. I certainly know when we were, doing some of the initial cleanup that there was the 8-foot marker of whether it was the flood or the hurricane that caused damage. And if it was under 8 feet, it was flood. And if you didn't have flood insurance, you didn't get insurance because it wasn't the hurricane. And that was not a small thing for the people who were there. Well, I am grateful. I remember the next several years I was just terrified as that anniversary came around, and while this year I was generally aware of it, I wasn't as terrified to have it come again. How is it for people in New Orleans as the anniversary comes?
It always brings up something, all loss triggers. I think there's a sense of we're almost preparing for next year as the 10-year anniversary, a sense of how can it, so already starting to think in terms of how can we be where we are 10 years later.
Dee, it seems like you turned your camera off. Did you do that on purpose?
It is on. It says it's on.
Well, thank you. Now we have your icon. Okay, today's going to be a day of surprises, I think, on Google on the Air. Well, you've had some more excitement in New Orleans more recently, and that's actually why we wanted to invite you starting a number of weeks ago. And I know you've all been involved with this. Deanna and Jim, you were there that day. Would you like to describe what happened and actually say the date, because it's gotten away from me. It was July, right? Late July are we talking about?
July 20th. It was the last day of the National Youth Justice Training that we were co-hosting with College of Social Justice.
Great. And tell us what happened.
What happened? So there was a worship service, and we were commissioning the National Youth Justice leaders to go forth to be agents of faithful change in the world. And in the middle of our prayer and meditation, voices started speaking up and speaking of abomination and speaking of hell, and as someone said, not speaking from UU theology. And more voices came, and people who had come to us as visitors started to stand up, and the men started to pull off their button-down shirts and show their T-shirts. And they were, the congregation with the National Youth Justice Training youth leading the way, circled up and started singing, while those who were disrupting the service were respectfully invited to remain respectfully present or to take themselves to the front of, past the threshold of the congregation.
Okay, hold on, pause a second. Jim, where were you when this happened? Deanna, I know, was up at the pulpit. Where were you yourself when this all took place? You're muted.
I was sitting in the 4th row. This is the first time in my 12 years in New Orleans I attended First Church that I wasn't in the pulpit, and I was just there to celebrate with the youth who were just great. It was such fun to see them take place and their participation in this class, and I thought, I'm going to be there. And Paul was out of town, cleared it with Paul, and so I was sitting in the 4th row, and right behind me, a woman got up in the moment of silence. We were remembering not only the troubles in the world, but also 2 members of First Church who have died recently, and it was a moment of silence. And this woman right behind me got up and started shouting in the middle of the moment of silence. And it was horrible shouting. Words that I remember hearing when I was in a more fundamental religious tradition, but something I haven't heard around Unitarian Universalism for a long time. accusations against us, against the kids, against everything that was happening in the worship service. And then in the row right in front of me were some of the youth, and a few of them were crying almost immediately in response to this shouting that was going on behind them. Well, after the woman behind us was ushered out, other people successively got up and started hollering, and this went on for 10 or 15 minutes when one after the other started shouting at those who were gathered there for worship. So Deanna held really the service together, and I looked around and realized that me, a pacifist, a Taoist, was the muscle, and started to usher other people out.
I don't know. Do we have Deanna back yet? If not, she and I are friends and spoke about it, and she talked about that moment of being in the pulpit and going, yes, this is really happening. I have to deal with this. What was that like for you, Jen?
Well, I was surprised. And for a while, I just kind of watched because I was participating in the service. And then Deanna kind of called on me to help usher people out. Reverend Jim Vanderweel, I heard from the pulpit, and can you help take people out? And so that's the point at which I realized, there are some things that I must be doing here to help with this situation. And after that, yes, the service carried on, and Deanna managed that, and the youth managed bringing the members of the congregation and the Unitarian Universalists there into a circle and to continue to sing. Meanwhile, Bart Frost said, would you call the police? And I realized that 911 is slow to respond in the city of New Orleans, so I called the local office. We had to figure out through the phone book how to get the local office, and we called them, and there I was calling the police and bringing them to the situation, and then back in to help escort other people out.
Wow. Deanna, I know you're there. We can't see you, but we're hoping that you viewers can see Deanna Van Diver. Can you describe what Joanna said when you knew, like, this isn't a test, this is happening, and what supported you right then? What helped you?
Several people have named to me afterwards that the best thing that happened for them in that moment was that when I realized what was going on, that I named it out loud for people, and I was so grateful. I mean, I literally had just caught like a snippet of a paragraph that there was an organization in town, and so quickly putting everything together, realizing that this is an invasive protest that's happening in the midst of our service.
And what was the organization, and what did the T-shirts say?
I choose not to give them more airtime, but their T-shirts were about being against family planning, and so just being really clear that Spirit was in the room and that we needed to stand together, and that there was a space I could hold, and that was, since I had the microphone, it was up to me to name the space, and being so grateful that everyone else was there doing their part. Reverend Jim Vanderweel, Seminarian Steve Williams, Bart Frost, the Director of Religious Education, definitely the National Youth Justice Training Youth, everyone who stepped, Jane Jensen, the incredible piano player who under great duress remembered to play the music. It took everyone, and I was really grateful that everyone was willing to move through the cognitive dissonance into a place of, wait, this is our sanctuary. This is where we're going to worship. And just so grateful that once the disturbance was moved out, I mean, there are those who sat, and it was clear they were going to pounce again at coffee hour, and they did. But to name before that happened, First Church has a ritual called radical hospitality. So to be able to name before it happened that they were going to be called upon perhaps to be more radically hospitable than ever before in this moment, and to really name the difference between a religious liberal's plurality of possibilities and a fundamentalist fear that there's only one way, and to be able to move into that space with as much love as possible. And
now, Paul, you are the minister in New Orleans, and I know that you were out of town when this happened. I wonder, when you came back, what was the state of the church, and what's been going on since that day?
Or even, like, what did you hear? Like, you were away. Like, did someone give you a call?
Let me tell you about that. I was
did the bat signal go up? Did the bat signal go up?
I was the conference chaplain at the VUU Musicians Network conference in San Diego. And so the musicians were all singing the worship service, both services in San Diego, and they have an hour between their two services. Well, my phone, I had it on stun, it buzzed during the first service, so I made some calls in between services and talked to Dee and to Jim and to another member of the church and learned what was happening as they were dealing with it there. But what I want to lift up about this is how much grace there was in it, layers and layers of it. It was a grace that I was out of town because I could come back and be all 8 cylinders firing as a pastoral minister to folks who were recovering from this shock and scary experience. It was also a great grace that 13 teenagers from around the country were being trained all that week, and they stood up and helped lead the rest of us, participated as partners, and bequeathed us a protocol, which we now use. You circle up. And when you circle up, what Deanna has said about that many times is from where she stood in the pulpit. That made it very clear who was disrupting and who was not. And it clarified things for the ushers, it clarified things for the congregation, and I think it helped everybody to respond as well as they did.
So to be clear, people stood in a circle and took hands around the people, or what is
that? That's correct, and sang, yes. And the youth led them into that posture. So that was there. The fact that Jim, for the first time in 12 years, was just a visitor and could be there to model how you gently but firmly escort disruptive presences out. Bart Frost secured the building, got the children to a safe place, made sure the parents knew where their children were, and helped escort folks back out. People were taking care of each other. People who were upset were being comforted by others, both in the sanctuary and out of the sanctuary. And there was just so much grace. That group could not have walked into a better place to be thwarted than our sanctuary that morning. All the right people were in the right places and knew what to do, and we just did what needed to be done, as Deanna said, in the full spirit of love that is the best of our faith.
I really appreciate, Deanna, the phrase plurality of possibilities, and that you held the space, just what you all just said. It's a testament to the best of who we can be as Unitarian Universalists.
I love the youth leadership. I find that so inspiring. We are.
I was impressed by the call to name the difference between the what you called the liberalism's plural of possibilities and the fundamentalist fear that there's only one answer, but really calling people in that moment to be vocal about who we were, I think was really important.
And Deanna, I like. Okay, mute everyone. I like what you said about the fact that people have come to you and said that when you stood there in the pulpit and named, this is what is happening, that was something everyone appreciated. And I just, I think that probably for we ministers who were watching this and going, okay, what would I do in that situation? This kind of gave us the step one, which is figure it out as fast as you can and name what is happening so that everyone's immediately on the same page, and then you can take those next steps.
We are halfway through this episode of The VUU. I just wanted to take a moment to say again that we are meeting with 3 ministers from the New Orleans area to talk about incidents that happened there in late July with some disruptive protesters in their service and how they responded. And also to invite you to tweet at #TheVUU, THEVUU, or to use the question and answer feature to write your questions. So, Deanna, in full disclosure, I am the mentor for Deanna Van Diver, and called me to tell me what had happened, and I said, are you looking for love and care, or are you looking for media advice here? And she said, media advice. So I said, well, I love that. That's my old job. And Deanna, you could not have done better with moving this story out into the world. You put my advice on steroids. Would you share with people how you and other people managed to bring something that happened in your congregation to the attention of Rachel Maddow and many other people?
It wasn't me. I'm very clear that there's such a big movement going on in this, especially in the South and throughout the country, but we're really clear about it here, to really limit access to healthcare and family planning in a lot of ways. So on that Sunday, when we were calling people for resources, one of the people we called was Planned Parenthood, and they sent their rapid response team, which happened to be just down the road because they were prepared for a protest outside of the construction site. So they were there to very quickly help people figure out how to leave the building, which was completely surrounded. Every exit was surrounded by protesters, and it's a citywide block. And talk about both how to leave and then to safely escort them out. So that conversation had happened. And I know that, for instance, Rachel Maddow is really looking at the pattern across the South. So this was a story that helped her tell that story in a very clear way. And, back in 2009, Dr. George Tiller was killed in his church when he was attending worship. And so this is another piece of really crossing that line, crossing that sacred barrier. And so I think that is a big reason that this had to be named. Like, the line has been crossed. It's been crossed in a way that had to be lifted up so that people can say this is not acceptable behavior.
Paul, you were talking about the Planned Parenthood clinic? You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to get my cursor to unmute it. Now it did. The clinic is about 4 blocks from the church that Deanna just mentioned. I just want to lift that up. That's why the police presence was there. This group, the New Orleans Police Department, knew they were coming and actually had done some training in how to handle the usual kinds of protests. And so Planned Parenthood was prepared, the New Orleans Police Department was prepared just a few blocks from our building, which is part of why when Jim called the precinct office, their response was so quick and so helpful, because they could tell us, okay, here's where we are, and here's what we've been doing to prepare. And they were actually, as well as Planned Parenthood's rapid response team, giving us counsel and sort of best practices and how to handle it. So was the NOPD. And speaking of best practices, this thing we're talking about naming what's happening in the moment, in the debriefing that we did during the week, it was lifted up to us that there's sort of a 4-step best practice around how to respond to a disruption. And the first step of that process is name what's happening in the moment. And that naming of it frames it and helps give the clarity. Then, ideally, you already have a protocol. We invented one on the spot, thanks to those young people. But you have a protocol, you do your protocol. So you name it, you do your protocol, and then you make sure that third step is make sure everybody's safe and secured, things are secured, and then the 4th step is the debriefing. and which we did Wednesday night. We actually had another grace in this whole thing was the board of the church had a scheduled meeting that Monday night. And I flew back from San Diego Monday, got off the plane, drove to the church, and came to the meeting. So the board had an immediate scheduled opportunity to debrief that at that level. And then I had already volunteered to lead a sing-along on Wednesday night, so we changed it to sing and debrief. Sing and debrief, let all us, you know.
Love that.
That's how we did it.
That really helps. You know, the thing of stating what's going on. This is, once when I was preaching, a woman fainted, and I was a guest preacher in this church, and they handed me this laminated sheet, and on it, it had paragraphs to read. In case of medical emergency, in case an armed gunman comes in case of disruption, all these different things. And it was so helpful. I probably would have fumbled around and said pretty much like, please stay seated unless you're a medical professional. But to have that to read, I could just feel so calm. And since then, I've thought that is such a smart thing to have right in the pulpit. And it said, and here's a song to sing in this occasion, you know. So that's what we did, and it was way less disruptive than it would have been. So I think this business of having protocols in advance is ideal. You never could predict exactly what will happen, but it sounds like you've now created protocols that next time, hopefully there will never be a next time. Next time you will have.
If you have that protocol, a copy of it, and can send it to me, I'd be most grateful.
I'll ask. It was First Universalist Church in Minneapolis. I'll ask them for it because it was. I don't know what, except Minnesotans are a little bit Germanic and like to feel in control. You know, I'd never seen it before, but I sure was glad it showed up at that moment.
Is there some place where all those things are, where like go and get that sort of information, get a little how-to? Anybody know?
Great idea. I don't know. Maybe someone will tell us.
Never mind.
Maybe someone will tell us.
Maybe we should have Fred Garcia.
And I see that we have a question from Lori Stone-Sertosky. What question have the children had in the aftermath of this event, and how have you addressed this with them? Which, great question, because I would imagine that our children, I mean, I'm sure that my children think of church as this eternally safe place where, you know, mom and dad may not know what they're doing, but someone's watching them, and now this happens. So, Paul, have you addressed that with the kids?
I wish Bart were here. I haven't personally, but Bart has been developing the plan for the religious education program for how to handle it and then also how to debrief. Yeah, I know he's preparing some things for teachers to use. Sort of a similar idea to what Meg was describing, to have something in the pulpit.
Well, we have a religious educator on the show. Aisha, what would you do you think?
Well, yeah, I was thinking as everyone was speaking, and really the most important thing that Paul talked about is the debrief, is processing, naming and processing, and not being afraid of the conversation and the questions. And children, as you know, most of us who've ever been around a child know, they don't pull any punches, and they're going to ask questions and be real. And as long as we're real with them, I think that's the most important thing. But you know, being prepared is really important, and hopefully we'll never need to be, you know, nothing will happen, but of course things do happen. It's funny, Joanna, as you were saying your kids think church is safe. I wonder if that's regional. I mean, my kids grew up in Jersey in an inner city church, and yes, in general they knew it was safe, but certainly they wouldn't have been surprised if, God forbid, something happened. So I wonder, I know with my kids that's not necessarily a given, but it's, I guess in some places it is for certain.
Well, safety is a lot of a construct that different people have in very radically different ways, as I think we're seeing in the wake of Ferguson. How people presume safety for themselves and other people, I don't really think we can generalize too much on that one. I wonder about after effects. Is there trauma in the congregation from this? Are they processing that?
Yeah, and one thing we've noticed is that it's as with everything else in life, people run at different speeds, and there are folks who only now are beginning to feel spooked or scared or shocked about this experience. And so I've lifted up, and we lift up to each other, the need to keep caring for each other and to be alert that your neighbor in the sanctuary or in a class or whatever you're doing at church, working on the building or something, may be experiencing still some effects that you have moved through, but they are still coping with, and to be sensitive and supportive and tender with each other as we will move through that. There will be aftershocks.
Something that your community has some experience with.
Well, yeah, nothing like a federal flood to train you to love your neighbors, I suppose.
Speaking of neighbors, for all of the ministers from New Orleans, what has been the response from other faith leaders, in your community and I guess even outside of New Orleans?
I put together a letter with the colleagues here, and we began to talk about reaching out, and it was July, the end of July. I'm supposedly on vacation, but I said I can do this, and we had 39 local ministers assigned a letter to the editor about the sanctity of worship, and that was published in the newspaper. I think that was very important because it reached across color lines, and it was very interfaith letter. The other thing that I want to mention, and I think we might miss this, is that it was very important that right after this event happened, Deanna and Bart and Stephen Williams, who worked here this summer and is in ministerial training in Tulsa at this time, pulled the youth back together, and they debriefed. They went through 3 different stages of debriefing before they left, because otherwise they were heading onto the bus to leave town, and this would have been the last thing in their memory as these kids separated. So it was really a wonderful thing that happened right at the end of their time with us. I think the other thing that's happened is that as ministers, we've made some connections, very important at this time, with Planned Parenthood in the city, and we're making some connections with African American ministers and members of groups here in this city in larger ways in the aftermath of this, and that's been very helpful as well.
I know that a lot of churches, UU's churches down in the South, often feel like they're really isolated in the community, that the broader community isn't sympathetic with them at all. Has that feeling been reinforced by this, or has the amount of support you've gotten from other clergy and the police even have made UUs feel less isolated in the community?
Well, I think there's a bit of race to that as well. Okay, I've got echoes coming. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Okay. We opened up talking about Katrina and the federal flood, and really over this past year, First Church has just now begun to feel that we physically, the building, and spiritually recovered from that experience. It's been a long haul to bring this church back to where it needed to be in terms of repairs and in terms of the congregation's feeling that we can focus outwardly. I don't think that the congregation ever stopped engaging the community, but the energy was not there, and you felt the energy turn this year. And so it felt really good. This church has been here at First Church since 1833 and has a long tradition of community engagement. We were involved in many, many things. Humane Society, I think, and United Way, maybe it was, and many different kinds of libraries and all this sort of thing in the city. So that sense of who we are in the city, not some little refugee group of liberals off in the side of the city, but an institution that's been central to New Orleans and to justice in New Orleans for a long time is who we feel we are. So it's not been so much that sense of isolation, persecution, as energized by it, and feeling the energy to reach back out to our neighbors. There's a story I want to tell in connection with that. We have a summer camp, a 2-week summer camp in June here each year based on the Harry Potter books, a Hogwarts camp. And that camp started, the first one was the summer before the flood. And we almost didn't have a second one, but somebody from out in the community called the director of that program and said, this is 6 months after, or so after the, well, more than that, 10 months after the flood. Still, the city is devastated. Are you going to have that camp again? My kids could sure use it. And we weren't thinking about doing it, but that call said, okay, our neighbors need us. We're going to do Hogwarts. And it's every year since we've done that camp. And a big part of the registration has not been our kids, but our neighbors' kids. And so there's a real sense of that's who we are, and reaching to our neighbors is central to who we are.
I love that. That's a great story. I'm curious, you know, you've mentioned, several of you have referenced Planned Parenthood and the coalition there and the support. I'm really curious how you think the fact that you're a congregation and not a secular organization made a difference in the way that the community saw this, in a way that the story was told, and in a way that the healing is happening.
Deanna here, I think that it has very particularly allowed us to speak to how our actions, the actions that came into our sanctuary were named as because of a belief, a social justice stand that we had taken in the world. And so it made it, here, we were, the three of us were invited, Reverend Jim and Paul and I, invited to speak to Justice and Beyond, which is a social justice organization in the city where everyone comes. It's held at Christian Unity Baptist on Conti Street here in New Orleans. And it allowed us to come in as people of faith in a way that sometimes as Unitarian Universalists we aren't necessarily invited into, which for me has been a very powerful and profound experience.
So, something go ahead, Jim.
And there are other groups in the city that we have reached out to, Women with a Vision, Women's Health and Justice Initiative, and I never thought, with all the problems that there are in the world, that I would be an advocate for women's health rights here in the city of New Orleans. But gosh darn, I am. And and sometimes the situation just presents itself in ways that you don't expect.
Patrice, we're going to say something?
Actually, I'll type it and have you ask, okay?
Patrice is in a public space this morning, as you might be able to gather from the fact that other people won't be quiet when she asks them to.
I think it'll be interesting, about a year from now, I would guess, to kind of see how this is all played out in the story of your church. Not only your church, Paul, but also the other churches in New Orleans, because I'm sure they were affected by this as well. I've talked before about what I call Hasatan angels. The idea that the Satan in the Old Testament was something that could kind of move, would use a negative way to move things forward in some, to get to a positive outcome. And it will be interesting to see if these people who wanted to invade your church and, to a certain extent, crush you and crush your message, if instead they wind up having the exact opposite effect.
It's definitely been an opposite effect. I mean, the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal, which is created by the 3 Unitarian Universalist congregations, we've had more calls in the past few weeks about bringing our training, bringing a conversation about having an anti-racist analysis as we do justice work. The congregations as a whole, there was someone from all 3 of the Greater New Orleans Unitarian Universalist congregations there on July 20th. The special music was provided by Patrick Mackin, who just won Principal of the Year in Louisiana, just saying, from the North Shore, and Reverend Jim was there from Community Church. I mean, it was actually live texted to the North Shore because they meet a half hour after First Church. So they were actually actively, sending prayer and support to First Church as it was happening because there was such a connection. So it's just been, it has been a connective, and as much as it has been something to go through, we're going through it together, and the together feels a lot bigger than it used to be.
Jim, how does this reach your church? You were there, but how is it living in your congregation, would you say, at this point?
Well, what Paul mentioned about coming back, our church reopened in April of 2011, and it took about 6 to 8 months to adjust to that, and through it all we have been much more active and involved in the community than we ever were. I think since the Federal Flood, Church realized that we don't have a social justice committee, we have a community ministry team, and that reaches out in many different areas in our community. And we have some great people, some great projects that are going on here, at Community Church. And, I'm so pleased. I look around and I say, you're doing great things. The Sewing Circle is doing menstrual kits for young women in Africa. Days for Girls project. It's tremendous effort that's going on. And I'm pleased, most of all, that the establishing of this cluster has allowed the members of the 3 churches to get together, meet each other. We worship together 4 times a year, and collectively back and support the efforts at the center.
In listening to the 3 of you talking about what has happened in the aftermath, it seems like something kind of counterintuitive has happened. Rather than kind of hunkering down and, okay, this is, we need to take care of our own, it sounds like, if anything, this has driven y'all even more out into the community.
Yes.
Yay! We love to hear that. Patrice is wondering if there are any trainings that are going to happen at other churches to respond to such an event. That's an interesting question. There are a lot of people who could be part of such a team, sadly, from different experiences in different congregations. It's an interesting idea for a General Assembly workshop, for instance. We are coming to the top of the hour, and we are a large group, so I'm going to invite people to start in with last comments. And let's start with our regular folks being very quick and then leave the final words for our guests. I just want to thank you for modeling such grace under pressure and such courage in the aftermath. And yay, New Orleans! It's a wonderful community I've been privileged to know for the last years, and congratulations on your amazing resilience.
Exactly. Congratulations, and hopefully, knock on wood, this will never happen in any of your ministries again. But if it does, you know what to do. That's the experiences I always had.
Blessings on all of you. I am just so proud to be. There we go again. For our viewers, I would say if you want to see how you can really talk about Unitarian Universalism out in the public sphere, go online, look for the video of the Reverend Deanna Vandiver being on the Rachel Maddow show. It was, I think, just fabulous.
We can put that link on the CLF Facebook page.
Well, thanks all you guys. I think you guys, I'm just awestruck by how great a job you did, and confident that the youth that we're bringing up are going to be great leaders in the future. And when the world comes knocking on your door and you answer it, and sometimes it knocks, kind of aggressively. Boy, there's a lot of energy that gets released in that, and that's good energy. So I'm really happy to see everything that's going on. Thanks.
Amen. I echo the thank you, and anyway, and I want to use the phrase expanding sanctuary, which Shauna just typed, instead of defending sanctuary, and I think it's such an inspiration that you use this to go out even more in the community. So amen and thank you.
And speaking of expanding sanctuary, Paul or Deanna, I know y'all have an event coming up this September there in New Orleans that I think is all about expanding sanctuary. Can you give us a plug?
Yes, no. Can I be heard?
Anyway, okay, I'll tell you that they have another Life on Fire is happening. It's happening this September. I don't have the dates right in front of me, and I know that Deanna and Paul, part of the Red Pill Brethren, are a big part of that.
Paul, take it. We can hear you fine. Say it.
You can hear me fine? Okay, yeah. It'll be the last weekend in September, and Reverend Ron Robinson will be preaching in my pulpit that Sunday. And it's a great opportunity it's an unconference. We decide what we're going to talk about when we get there. And it's a great opportunity to network and to talk about things with interested folk and sort out what you'd like to sort out.
And see New Orleans. Deanna,
another New Orleans event, by the way, in 2017, General Assembly is coming here, so y'all come.
Yes, and you don't have to wait until...
There's one more event in New Orleans. It's Church of the Larger Fellowship has an experiential learning training for religious leaders, and that's in early February. Yes, no, late January. Sorry about that.
MLK weekend.
Yeah.
And the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal is available throughout the year for anyone who'd like to come participate in the training. The thing I said at my board meeting, which happened to be scheduled right after this happened in July, was I'm really glad this happened in my second year of ministry and not my first. And I'm so grateful to every single one of you for your support and your wisdom and everything that you've helped to bring. I'm really clear that we're all in this together, and I'm really grateful for that.
Jim Vanderwill, you get the last word.
There are people around our movement who should probably know more about undoing racism, and the program offered at the center is a wonderful avenue for people to take in and learn together. So let's lift up again the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal. They do great work here in New Orleans.
Amen to that. Great to have you all here. See everybody next week for our next episode. Take care. Have a great week.